from historic downtown Orange, California. It's time for the Bob Gurr Show. From undersea adventures to highways in the sky, he's done it all. And now, here's your host, the man, the myth, the Disney legend, Bob Gurr.
Hey kids, boy do I ever have a super guest for you today. This is going to be so good. This is Chris Crump. He's been a friend of mine, I think, for like 40 years. I've worked with him at I think various companies. He's worked at various companies. He's done all the doggonest things. And he knows that I know that he has a single course in life that's the doggonest thing. And I am so interested to find out how in the world this started. So anyway, we're going to talk to Chris here, and we're going to learn a lot of stuff this morning. Not only about him, but his father just happened to be Rolly Crump. Now, how many people ever have Rolly Crump for a father? Anyway, what I want to ask you first is, children somewhere between 3 and 5 have little remembrances of little snippets of something. It might have been fun, it might have been terrifying, it's kind of disturbing. And as you look back once in a while, you say, what the heck was that? I have this little memory of thing. I can't figure out where it went, how it goes together. But there's usually these little snippets, and they're always between 3 and 5. So I want you to dig back and see if there's little goofy thoughts that you've had that just never seem to have made any sense. But as we'll talk through it, you'll find out those were what I call the seeds of Chris.
Okay.
And as you grow along past 3 to 5, it always winds up, that's your nature, those little seeds. The nurture is what either modifies it or encourages as you go along. So we're going to look at the thought of seeds get nurtured as you go along.
Okay.
Now that makes sense?
Makes sense.
So let's see what you can think of. That first little snippet that might have been scary, or it might have been exciting or inspiring, just anything.
Well, I think it was probably a scary one. I think we were in San Diego. We'd stay down there at a beach house, and there was a grassy slope, and we would roll down that grassy slope. And I remember rolling down that grassy slope and landing like in a pond of water. And I actually remember this, and my grandmother gave my father a movie camera, and it wasn't me, but I think it was my sister. There's movie footage of us doing that thing, and then I literally remember being underwater and seeing water.
That's a good example. So that's something that is a source of nightmares. It's a source of, what was that?
Could be. I don't know. You just asked me to come up with something a long time ago that's kind of scary, and that was pretty scary.
How about things that you always wanted to revisit? What was that? You know, this kind of a thought.
Revisit because it was something fun and exciting. Revisit.
And and you wanted to do it again, like when you're 3 to 5 years old.
You know, it's hard. I know some people can rattle off. I think my sister Teresa rattles off stuff and she remembers at 3.
Yeah.
I can't get there. I can't get all the way back to that. You know, now this is a Disney memory, and this is a very cool memory, because when Rolly was working on the Tiki Room, and they were programming it in '62, so I was about 6 by then, 6 or 7.
Okay.
We went down, so my sisters and I would go down to the park in the morning when Dad was working, and the park was closed, and he'd park behind Main Street, and we'd walk into the park, and he was working in the Tiki Room programming, but we were allowed to just roam around. So I just had this memory of I was on Main Street by myself, no people. And in a moment like that, you're kind of going, you know, this is pretty cool. Like, this is not something that a lot of kids get to do, right? Yeah. Or a lot of people don't get to do, right? And that was pretty cool.
What did you think of that after times when you would go back to that little memory of being there on Main Street, nobody around, just like Walt in the morning? He's got his own fun place by himself, and suddenly you are in the same spot.
It's pretty cool. I don't know. I haven't put much together other than people ask me about memories, and I bring that one up, and most people think, wow, that's...
You see how strong cool. That one is?
Yeah.
See, like you say, you know, there's not too many, but you gave it the scary one, and now you gave one that was literally a rock solid memory. Yeah. That probably really set your course of wanting more of that. Is that how it went?
Maybe. You know, that was just we felt, you know, it's like when you go to school and you know, the teacher asks all the kids, you know, what's your dad do? You know, and then they go around the room and I say, well, my dad works with Walt Disney. And they're hush in the room. He what?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like it's the coolest dad story. I mean, it just is.
Yeah. Okay, this leads me to the point of question I really wanted to ask you was, how long does it take for you to figure out you don't have just a regular father, you have some kind of very special, public, recognized father? What does that do to you? And just say instead of daddy's just regular daddy.
Well, you know, and again, another question I've been asked countless times. It's still your home. It's still your life. So I don't know what it's like to live in the house 5 houses down where dad's a teacher or dad's an accountant. I know what the houses look like, and they look pretty dull, you know. Mm-hmm. Our house is colors and stuff, and we're painting and we're making stuff, and it's art school at home, right? I never went to technical art school. I had art school at home, right?
Yeah, this is incredible because I always got the impression somehow your surroundings, that was the way Rolly does stuff every day, you somehow were born into this already existing, all-encompassing, let's say, art creation place.
Yeah.
So you're, as you would talk to other kids in grammar school, they must have sounded, as you said, very, very dull, because you would try to answer the question, well, what's your father like? What's your home like? And I'm surrounded by all this cool stuff, you know. I got surrounded by an empty Disneyland on Main Street one time.
Yeah.
So this is what I'm talking about when you have the nurture. You had a couple of little seeds, but this nurture, you probably had the most super nurture of anybody I know. I can't visualize, from knowing your father well and working with him on a lot of stuff, what must that have been like? That might have, your home was your own Rolly Disneyland in a way.
It was, and so the house on Encino Avenue in Northridge was photographed, and it was in a magazine. So the house that I lived in when I was very young was photographed, it was published in a magazine, and the magazine comes home and it's like, that's where we live, right? Now, the only difference about that is, you know, photographers come in and they mess the whole place. They move furniture, they bring like flowers in, they bring decor in, and all of a sudden the place is like, it's our house and it's some of our furniture, but it's scooched around and it's, you know, it's been made to look a certain way. And I'm thinking, you know, Dad likes stuff the way he likes it. And like, why would he allow them to, I'm thinking to myself, why would he allow them to just completely mess his house up? Of course, they put it back together again, but right. It just didn't seem like he'd go for that. But he never bothered to say anything about it. He just let him do it.
Yeah. See, this is why it's, your life was sort of this charmed, magical path, because how many other kids that you'd ever meet, one day you open the magazine, well, that's my house. Oh, it's on national news. Oh, everybody's reading about this, but that's still my house.
It's my house, or Dad's on television, The Wonderful World of Color, and Walt Disney's asking him questions. And this happened twice.
Oh.
So now, you know, well, watch Wonderful World of Color because my dad's going to be on this Sunday, right? And the first one was the Tower of the Four Winds. And it comes up and we're all like, there's Dad, there's Walt. And there's Dad with the Tower of the Four Winds, and he's blowing the propellers. And we're thinking, Dad, are you going to stop blowing the propellers and maybe talk to Walt? And he's just... And we thought that was a little goofy. We thought that was a little, like, we would have liked to hear more talking.
Yeah. Well, this is interesting. The picture you just described is the impression that I got over time watching him and working with him. Rolly was not a person that could be controlled in any manner. He would do things his way so completely, and luckily what Rolly would do, art-wise, motion-wise, model building-wise, Walt liked it more than something that was not quite so good, because they're the people I never saw them get away with what Rolly got with. But what you described was something, he's got Walt Disney here. It's on camera. No, he's doing what he wants to do. He designed something, and the blades have to go around, so I'm going to blow on them. Stand by, Walt. I'm going to do this. This is kind of an incredible picture. See, a lot of people would not get that, but you were in a position to say, oh, I'm in this house. Well, it's my house, but I'm looking at it in a magazine. Now I'm watching TV, and my dad's getting away with what he wants to do, and Walt has to stand aside for a few seconds. This is an intriguing picture. Oh my God!
I love that clip. I've seen it I don't know, a million times, especially now. And Walt's going back and forth between models, and then he says, "We've got things from animals from around the world. We got a camel, a llama." And he goes, "Where's the camel and the llama?" And it's a little tiny scale model, and you don't have the animals, which is a little ball. And the dad's, "Where's the llama?" And Walt says, "Dad says, oh, it's a little green ball down there." The little green ball down there. Okay.
Yeah. See, Rolly always did that, as I recall. He would make up an instant, stupid, crazy answer to a question that shouldn't have been asked. It was like instant payback. Yeah. Oh, now, I also remember seeing pictures of, well, I think you're 8 or 9 years old or something like that. Unlike most kids, you had this shop, you had a bench, you had a wall full of stuff, you had tools, all kinds of stuff like that. How did that come about? And I think that would have been the final solid nurturing path that sort of said, here is the path I'm on, and I have these tools, and I am learning, and I just happen to have a father who's a super teacher.
Yeah.
What's that like?
Well, so that was the house we lived on Encino in Northridge, and there weren't enough bedrooms for all of us. So the deal was my sisters got their own bedroom, but then I had my own bedroom. And Dad built this wonderful desk, which was a work table, and he put shelves on it. And, you know, there's, back in the day, see, I was born on Halloween, right? I was born on Halloween.
Oh, that's the goofiest holiday because you can be and do anything you want.
Exactly.
Oh, and you're doing it.
I'm doing it now. So all the monster models, and so this is one of the monster models, and I just bought this especially for you.
Okay.
I built this thing recently, but there was Frankenstein, Dracula, Wolfman, like those are the three universal, like the big three, right? And then you get to the Creature of the Black Lagoon, right? Anyways, this was an easier one to build. Yeah. So, anyways, and they still make these, but they just don't call it the Creature of the Black Lagoon anymore. The model company just calls it the Creature, which you think, well, they don't have the rights to the Creature of the Black Lagoon for a full logo. Anyways, back to this deal. So, Saturdays, Dad would take me to a hobby shop, and I'd go into the hobby shop and the model, and I'd pick out a model that I wanted to build, and he'd buy it for me, and I'd bring it home and I'd build it, right? So I had my work table, I had my tools, and I had the models that I wanted to build, and I was building these models. Now, I was probably at the time anywhere between, I don't know, 6, 7, something. And I'm relatively certain that the model level I was building at was a lot higher. Like, you know, things say for ages, you know, 6 to 10, or, you know, there's always an age range on a toy or a thing. I'm pretty certain I was building stuff a little ahead of my age range. So I just kept doing it, and he kept buying me the models, and then eventually I wanted to build stuff that you couldn't find a model kit on. So Dad would bring home supplies from work. So he'd bring home the materials that they were using in the model shop. They were using balsa wood, they were using illustration board, and you were cutting it with an X-Acto knife, or you were sawing it, and you were gluing it together with white glue, and that was pretty much it. And I remember the supercar series, and I built the little supercar out of balsa wood.
Well, you know what you just said is my life as a young child was a similar way. Yes, my father would bring me a little model or a kit or something, or a toy, and I would play with it, take it apart. I couldn't get it back together, but I want to know how it's built. And it didn't take very long, and it seemed natural to me. I'm much more interested in having something that doesn't exist, because I could make it my way.
Yeah.
I did that with Crayolas on a closet wall. Got in trouble for that, but I wanted to make and see things that don't exist. Seemed to be more fun than see something that's, oh, well, that's already figured out. And that sort of, I never changed after that. It was always that, well, I can do that myself. I think you wound up doing the same thing. But just before that, watching your father build stuff by hand, this must have been an inspiration to say, oh, I'd like to try that. Maybe I could do that too. So was there a time that before he would start bringing you models or kits or something that you wanted to grab something and make something with your hands?
I just remember the model kits.
Okay.
And then I remember Dad bringing materials home, and then, like I said, I wanted to build this car that I couldn't find a kit for, so I built that one. So I took materials, and I had to figure out how to draw the part, cut the part, sand it, put it together without plans. So you're building models from plans. You have all these parts, you've got the instruction sheets, but I like the precision of doing things, right?
Okay.
Cutting stuff out, putting it together, gluing it right. So I think my gift was I was doing things in a very precise and specific and very meticulous, particular way, right? Dad was a little more all over the place, right? His stuff was, you know, it was
very Crump.
It was Crump. He would talk about I'm sorry, the name completely escapes me, and it shouldn't. He was the guy who was working with on Haunted Mansion with the pipe.
Oh yes, I'll think of the name too.
Yeah. Anyways, this is horrible, right, but it'll come to me. Yeah. Anyways, he called him. He says, "Well, he was a funny guy. He was a tinker toy guy." Yeah. Now it just meant that he just kind of kludged things together, like very crude, right? And that was Dad. Dad did things in a very crude way, right? Yeah. Whereas my stuff was a lot more like tight. And like when you're doing woodworking, you know, when you do a joint, like when you cut a 45 and you put two 45s together, you know, it's 45 and 45. It's not 46 and 45, right, because then it's not square, right? So I did woodworking at a very young age, and it had to be, the joints had to be tight, the cutting had to be good. I had to do stuff perfect. That was me. You
just gave me another seed of nurture. I'm going to hop ahead, get ahead of myself.
Okay.
I worked with you in a shop. We were making goofy stuff for a crazy restaurant. And I always had to be precise. I kept a list of everything. One day I discovered you're out there with your clipboard and you're got to have all these lists. And I was horrified. I thought, well, I'm the only one that does that. And then I found Chris does exactly the same thing. And I think we had some words about, you're an inveterate list maker. You just told me the clue how you're mentally, very early, had to be precise and organized, which led to, if you're going to do stuff, you have procedural steps, you have things to keep track of, on and on and on. That is a very important thing, that somehow you understood the importance of that at such a young age. A lot of people never catch on to that. But the funny thing is, you've also shown me you did this under the tutelage of somebody that was free and easy and didn't have to be precise.
Exactly.
Two opposites.
Very opposite. Yeah. Very opposite. And you know, I chose at a certain point to not do artwork.
Why?
Dad had that part. That was his.
Oh.
If I go down the art path, I knew, oh, well, that's not quite like your dad, or you know, I'm going to be dealing in some kind of comparison thing, and I didn't need that. Like that was something I kind of figured out pretty early, actually.
Oh, that's so important, because that way, why would you compete when it's easier to go do your own thing your way? Then you can't be trapped as competing with anybody else.
Right.
Oh, that's another solid tool that you devised for yourself.
Yeah. So
let me ask this question: at what point, when you're in school, you're going through grammar school and you get into the 7th grade, pretty soon to get into the 8th grade and things, were you still continuing wanting to always build things?
Yeah, so there were shop classes. So in junior high, my school years, junior high started the shop classes. So I was doing wood shop, and then there was a plastic shop. And plastics, you're using similar tools to woodworking tools. You're just using different materials, and you've got to do different processes to work with plastics. So I gravitated to shop classes, and I was knocking stuff out and building stuff, and I just picked it up. And tool use, it just came naturally to me, and I somehow think there's a genetic thing. I think there were some engineers on the side of my grandmother that I think worked on the railroads that were possibly engineers. So I think there's some kind of like figure it out gene buried.
Yeah.
Because if I've come away with anything as I'm now almost 70, I'll figure it out. Like that those words.
Yes.
Figure it out. And that's a life thing, right? Because that applies to almost anything.
If you look at most of the Imagineers that Walt gathered in those early years, they all had that same characteristic. On one hand, they had no fear to do something that's unknown, and is balanced by have the zeal to figure it out, as you say, those simple things. I know I was big about that. Nothing would terrify me, no matter how big and frightening it was. You can figure it out. So get started, which means that's much more analytical compared to your father, which was much more flibberty-gibbet, off the wall, oh, this is cute and oh, this is fun stuff, which meant he probably had a type of a freedom that you didn't have, because that freedom was your diligence about an orderly way to achieve something carefully.
Yeah, well, you know, when you build these things, you build them in order. Like you can't, you know, you can't put the head on before you put the arms on. Or I mean, in this case, there's certain sequencing that has to happen, and then that go together well that way. You do it the wrong way, and you're going to get stuck. And then you're going to have to tear it apart and start over again. So, like, that's a waste of time, in my opinion. All right. So I'd rather figure it out. So I'm building the thing, or I'm looking at instructions and going, well, and that's why this, this, and this, and this.
Yeah.
Not like the person, and I've run into these folks.
Okay.
They get the furniture and they dump the bag out and they just start making stuff, right? And it's like, no, you count the hardware, you look at all the parts, you look at the instructions, and you see the sequence so that you don't have to go back and take it apart and put it back together again, because you go like 3 steps in and you realize, no, this other part needed to go together first because now I can't get this other part to go with that one, right? So I guess I just had an analytic and an understanding of this, along with what I'll consider advanced tool use, and all of that working together. But at the time, I'm not analytic about what I'm doing. I'm just doing it, but I am doing it differently than Dad. And Dad just talked about his imagination. He wrote about it. He talked about it in the documentaries that when he was little, he would come home from school and he would turn on the radio and he would listen to the radio, and then he had to make pictures of what was being described on the radio in his head, and then he would draw. So he would listen to the radio, Jack Armstrong, All-American Boy, and then he'd draw the All-American Boy, or he'd draw, Captain America or whatever, right? Crude, but still, he's an only child. This is before the term latchkey. He got home, his mom was still working, he's by himself, and he's entertaining himself.
Ooh, that is such a clue right there. I know that feeling. He and I grew up in exactly the same era, because backing up a little bit, I had a little tiny Emerson radio that my mother figured out I was supposed to be asleep, but if you have a radio like that, it had the little tubes in it, it had a hum. She could almost hear the hum. I had to bring the volume up just above the hum so I could get the words that she still couldn't hear. And as I recall, in an hour, there'd be 4 15-minute programs. The Green Hornet, the Lone Ranger, all of that. And you're exactly right. In that era that kids don't have anymore, when you listen to radio at night when you're supposed to be sleeping, the words allow you to create your own vision of what you're hearing. And pretty soon you have years of imaginary tales of terror or joy or conquest or something. And somehow I think that affects people for a very long time, because you see the ability to create what doesn't exist, and you're doing it with what you hear on a radio. Nobody listens to radio like it's radio anymore. Everything is up front.
It's
you
video,
don't get a chance
it's it's on your phone. Yeah, it's everywhere.
Yeah, you don't get a chance to invent
it. Yeah.
They never invented or never been seen thing by yourself. Wow, this is so revealing that you're describing. You had a slight touch with your father's era, which he and I were contemporaries, coming up through the 30s, 40s, and 50s before we started doing any kind of work. So tell me, you got into high school. They didn't have too much shops still?
They did.
They did?
Oh, they did. So that was like propelled right into 10th grade. And the first assignment in woodshop in the 10th grade was a chessboard. So the chessboard was a cool thing to build, but the design, the shop teacher talked about what the design of the chessboard was, is it taught you how to work with all the different tools in the shop. So you had to learn how to use a joiner. So you had hardwoods that were in the rough, so you had to use a joiner. Then you had to use a planer to get the wood smooth. Then you had to use a table saw to cut the strips. You had to glue them together. Then you had to switch them. So you glued strips together, you switched them to make the checker pattern. Then you put it together, you learned how to use clamps. You clamped it all together. Then you had to sand it smooth. Then you had to put the edges on it. You learned how to do 45s with a radial arm saw. And then you were graded on your joints, on whether they were loose, whether they were tight, your finish, whether you put a good finish on it. And there you have it. There's the chessboard. And I still have the chessboard.
I'm guessing that you never got less than an A in every shop class.
No, I didn't. I got an A. I got into a shop and it was like, this is home. Like this is the pond I need to be swimming in.
Did you do things other than wood shop?
plastic shop. I did metal shop.
Right.
I learned how to use metal tools, but there was this interesting phenomenon of you talk about the social angle, right? There's a difference between like all the skills of trades. They all have their personality types, and all the metal guys, they didn't mind being greasy and cut up and dirty, and they were like the bikers or like the hard, what back in the day they call the hard guys, right? So the metal guys, you know, I learned I could do the stuff. I could cut it, you know, grind it, weld, all that stuff. But I didn't like the guys. I didn't like the crowd. So the carpenters were more like the surfer dudes. They were more cool, right? And when you're working with wood and you got dust all over, you just take an air nozzle or a brush and you just brush it off, and you're clean and you're cool, and your hands are all right, you know? You look at guys that work on cars and metal and what have you, their hands are always a mess, right? Grease, stuff under their fingernails, they don't care. Grease is everywhere.
Did you ever have auto shop?
Had auto shop once, yeah.
Once.
Yeah, I didn't like, it wasn't like, and Dad did not encourage working on cars.
Oh.
I had a problem with, the family van was a 1968 Dodge van. I inherited that. And we were living together in Newport Beach when he had his design company. And there was a leak. And I looked under it, and one of the lines had a cut in it, and it was leaking. And I thought to myself, well, I'll just get a piece of tubing and some clamps, hose clamps, and just cut the thing, put a tube on it, put hose clamps on the other side. It won't leak anymore. And my dad's like, what the heck are you doing down there? He goes, you're going to screw the car up. You're going to make it worse. And that comes from he doesn't know how to work on cars.
Okay.
Right? He can't do it, so I shouldn't be able to do it. And we had those moments of conflict where I would be in the garage with him. This was much earlier, much younger. And he'd be working on something in the garage, and he'd have a vise, and he'd like, have the thing clamped, and he's trying to use a wrench or do a thing. And I'm sitting there looking at what he's doing, and I'm thinking to myself, how would I do it? And I'm in my head going, I'd pick this wrench up, and I'd do this, and I'd do that, and I'd do this, and then it would be, you know. And then my dad's going on, and he's just all frustrated. And I looked at him, and I'd think about it. I say, you better be right, because if you're wrong, it's not gonna be a good day. So I said, Dad, if you just, he's like, what, you know, because he's all frustrated because he can't figure it out. If you take the wrench and the and he would do that, and then he'd get it, and he'd go, oh, okay, good, thanks, you know, and he'd just keep going.
See, this is the crazy part. You two guys have actually diverged. It was somewhere in that DNA and the nurture. That what you just told me, I could just see that picture. If I was in Rolly's shoes, I'd say, I don't want a kid smarter than me that has to tell me to solve something I can't solve. He just says, here, do it this way.
Yeah.
I can appreciate it. But the other side of it is, I'll bet you had some moments you could say, I'm smarter than my old man. I showed him something he didn't know how to do. I don't know. I think I just understood what I knew how to do, or what I was good at, and I knew what he knew how to do or what he was good at. Yeah. Because we would do paintings at home, right? He did this painting for Ernie Ball for the guitar shop. This giant long painting, I don't know, 12 feet long or whatever. Anyways, he draws it all out. It's on masonite. Put some wood frame on masonite. Love masonite because it's cheap. Masonite's still cheap. So paints it out white, gets the pencil out, draws everything, and then it was a family project. So, okay, here's this little area right here. Okay, here's this blue paint. You paint this thing. My sister, you paint this orange thing. My mom would come back, and she'd actually do line work and inking, and she would do fill-in stuff. So the paintings were Rolly paintings as he drew them, but like many artists, and some people don't know this, you know, they have assistants, and they have people that help them create the art. And they're not doing every gosh darn thing themselves. This is another super revealing thing you gave me. At those ages, still fairly early, long before you get to college, you understand how teams go together to produce something, and they all have different skills and all different interests, and they don't necessarily match, but they will co-op in something. So guess what? This meant when you got your first jobs, you understood the producibility of something. So let's say you're in high school now.
Yeah.
What did you remember that you really, really wanted to do when you finally escaped from the 12th grade?
Wasn't sure, other than the fact that in 3 years of high school, I did more work in high school. My third year, I had the family van. I talked my teacher into letting me drive my van on campus and panel it, like put wood paneling in this van that didn't have any interior, right? And he says, well, you've done everything else. You've surpassed all my other students. I kind of can't say no. He said, but this is a cabinet shop. So you have to put a cabinet in your van, and then that'll qualify for the cabinet work that I have to teach you.
Oh, how clever.
So I put a cabinet in, doors and what have you, finished it with Formica. I bought all the paneling from a shop that did custom van work. I bought the paneling they had. I bought the molding that they sold. And I had this tricked out van that I did while I was in school. And some of my buddies, we'd get in the van between shop classes and do stuff we weren't supposed to do.
Ah. Well, in parallel, I had auto shop, quite obviously.
Obviously.
Yeah. And that period of time, it was so logical. The school is free. They have all the materials.
Yeah. And the tools.
I want to work on my Model A Ford, or I want to rebuild some things on my 36 Ford. Along with the other guys, this was sort of interesting in those eras, which doesn't happen anymore.
No.
You have a teacher, Mr. Woodward, was going to teach us about almost anything to do with cars. Okay, boys, bring your project cars in, and then we will, for the whole semester, we're going to do projects on each of your cars. To have a school do that today on a school budget is impossible.
Yeah.
Kids, I want to make this point. How many students today never had the education that Chris had and Rolly and I had in a public school, which would give us hands-on experience? By the time we leave the 12th grade, we probably know more than people that are in college, because we had that kind of education and we could do our own stuff the way we wanted. That's a little history lesson for you. That we had a really good, and guess what?
Yeah.
Walt had the pick of everybody in that era. Now, why do you think the reason Walt got so much done? We had kids that come up through school with shops, and they could do hands-on stuff, and they're quite organized.
Yep.
So,
Absolutely.
What was your first job out of high school?
First job out of high school or during high school?
Oh, well then during,
So I had enough school credits that I didn't have to go to school full time in the 12th grade. So I started, my very first job was selling flowers on freeway off-ramps in the San Fernando Valley. Well, I had a van. So they said, well, you have a van, so you can do flower delivery. So I delivered flowers when I was in high school from like after lunch from like 1 to 6 or 7.
Really?
Yeah. So now back then, how did you find someplace? Because they, I'd go in and they go, what do you got? I go, well, here, you need to send these to this hospital in Van Nuys. They give me an address. And the address is on the card. And that's it. So I pulled out, and this was before Thomas guides, and then Thomas guides nobody knows. Well, some people know what a Thomas guide is, but a Thomas guide is just a more organized version of a fold-out map. So I had different fold-out maps for different parts of the valley, and I just pull it out, and there, where's the number? And then I go to the key, and it says the number is like H5, right? So you go H5, oh, it's right there, and then I drive there, but then you're looking for the number of the place. And then the number of the place doesn't quite match what's on the map. So you're on a numbering system and you get to a place and, oh, there's a wash. And the number is really on the other side of the wash. Okay, now I got to, back to the figure it out. Got to go down here and come back up to get to that number because it was on the other side of the wash. So then I started learning numbering in the valley. And literally to this day, Woodland Hills on Ventura Boulevard is like 2,100, and Van Nuys is like 1,500. I still remember the numbers.
Interesting.
The valley is a grid.
Yeah.
It's literally, it's like you look at it from space, and it's a 90-degree deal, and it's very organized. And so I learned how to find places when maps were kind of getting me close, but the ending you had to figure out.
A little aside, do you know why the valley is like that on a half-mile and quarter-mile ordinance?
No, I don't.
There's a Mr. Lancashire and a Mr. Van Nuys who saw the water that Mr. Mulholland stole from up in the valley east of the Sierras and delivering water. And the valley was a big, flat, kind of a sagebrush-like place full of weeds. Right. And these two guys, along with a couple of guys, said, "Ooh, do you know what we can build here?" And it's a flat valley. They said, "Okay, everything is a half-mile, everything, break it into quarter miles." And so the whole valley predominantly is that way, except a few streets that are angles. The angles are because when you had a wagon in the 1700s, that's the way you went. Direct from here to there.
Direct from here to there, not just...
No, then by the time the valley got built, you got to go there by doing this. You can't, one or two streets are direct. Anyway, that's a little aside.
No, it's all, this is all related.
Yeah, so basically you took on your first job as a job rather than a creative one.
Well, I was still in school.
Okay, but this is funny. You have a half-time business and you have a half-time school.
Right. But I'm like earning money, so I could buy clothes, I could buy food, I could, buy whatever. So I had spending money.
How excessively smart at that time.
Well, I wanted spending money, and I didn't want to have to beg my parents for it.
Right. Yeah.
Right? There's nothing worse than, hey, Dad, give me $20, please. No.
So what would be the very first job that you would be back to the creating and inventing stuff with your own hands?
Okay, that first job was building speaker cabinets in Orange County.
All right.
So I went to college for a little while, and it was in San Luis Obispo, Cal Poly. That didn't kind of work out. It's a whole other story. Anyways, Dad moved down to Newport Beach. He had a company with Ernie Ball called Design 27. Mm-hmm. And I called him up and I said, "This isn't working out up here." He goes, "Well, you can move in with me, right? So if you go to college." So I went to Orange Coast College, and I moved in with Dad in Newport Beach. And his pal that he did his business with, Ernie Ball's son, Sterling Ball, was working for a company called Quilter Sound Company. Mm-hmm. And so Sterling and I were close. We were, the Ball and the Crump families were real close in the 60s. And we hung out a lot, and he called me Crumpo. "Crumpo, I got this job at Quilter." He goes, "I bet you could build speaker cabinets there. I'm going to ask them if they want a guy to help build speaker cabinets." So I said, "Okay, cool." So after school, I got this job, and the guy who ran the shop, who built the speakers themselves, and hiring somebody. I'm not a big person, right? I'm not and he's like wondering, how am I going to get this scrawny kid to build stuff that's big and heavy, and you got to maneuver a 4x8 sheet of plywood, But he took me on and gave me a chance, and he taught me how to do stuff, and I figured it out.
Back to your standard methodology.
And literally, I'm not kidding you, this "I'll figure it out" thing has only come to me really recently. Like the word, like "I'll figure it out," and what a through line that is for so many different things.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so he's teaching me everything. And the speaker that you sell for PA systems, guitar amps, bass amps, what have you, wooden box covered with vinyl, and then hardware attached to it.
Yeah, like big old bass reflex boxes, things like that.
But you had to cover it with vinyl, and so the vinyl, we're spraying contact cement, and then you put the vinyl on. There's a particular way you cut things and make joints, and then the joints have to be perfect joints. Ooh. And screw it all together. Put the hardware on, sequenced. Yeah, cut lists for wood shop. You're building X amount of cabinets out of X amount of pieces of plywood. So you have a cutting list, and you go through your cutting list, and everything is in an order. You get the most efficient use out of a sheet of 4x8 plywood by cutting certain things lengthwise and crosswise.
You became an efficiency manager.
I did. And that was for my first job building stuff.
Tell me about some of the other jobs, because I got the impression you did more darn things in more darn places.
Yeah. So then a quick detour. I went on the road with the English rock band Jethro Tull. I was a roadie.
Really?
And that
I did
job,
not know any of that.
No, rattling off one's resume is like, well, hey, do you know this about me? No, and again, Sterling Ball, Ernie's son, got me this job, and this band had fired a roadie in Texas. They were on a national tour. They were coming to Los Angeles, and they were having a hard time finding somebody to take the job. Road work is hard, right?
Yeah.
But back to scrawny little kid, right? So I get this. Sterling literally talks this guy into it on the telephone. I mean, this is sales stuff. This is like this guy. Sterling could talk almost anybody into anything. Yeah. And he said he can do it. I know he can do it. He's worked with small bands in Los Angeles. He's got a van. He would stuff all the equipment in there. He's done it locally. He can do it big time. Okay, put him on the phone. He puts me on the phone. He goes, listen, kid. He goes, if you think this is going to be a big party, you got it wrong. This is hard work. This is every day. This is long hours. It's this, that, and the other thing. Are you sure? I said, yeah, I'm sure. So I take this job, and I am on the road doing rock shows, 12,000, 10,000, 12,000 screaming kids every night for like 45 shows, flying on airplanes almost every day, going to hotels, checking in, eating, setting up the stage, doing the show, breaking it down, getting up early, getting on the plane. It's this very rigid, hardcore deal, traveling with a big rock band, and I was a famous roadie.
How old were you then?
I was 19.
You're not even an Orthodox adult, and you're a roadie? With your own van,
getting paid.
You can build the speakers?
Bob, get this. I was getting paid $1,000 a week, with including per diem, including meal allowance.
I think that's more than Rolly earned at Disney.
Yeah, it was. I'm not sure if I got into the details of how much money I was getting paid, but he actually wasn't thrilled about me taking that job.
Ooh.
The thing I was supposed to do, I was supposed to stay working at the speaker company over the summer. He moved to Florida for the Circus World project that he did with Design 27. And I was supposed to take care of his house, pack up the house. Well, I actually helped pack up the house, but stay in the house, finish it all up, and then fly to Florida. And I was going to work in the wood shop on the Circus World project.
Okay.
So this tall job gets in the way of all that, and I couldn't turn it down.
Okay.
Like I just couldn't turn it down. I mean, that was just way too cool, an amazing opportunity. In fact, his mother, who was living with us at the time, even said to me, "You need to do this, even if it's defying her son." I said, "Dad's not going to like this." She goes, "You need to do it anyways."
This is like how you add discipline to stuff that's very wearying to do. A lot of people never go through an experience that you have to do the things you like, but boy, there's so many negative things about doing something because you're dependent on a whole bunch of other people. And then if you don't show, there's 12,000 ticket buyers don't have a show. That a lot of kids don't get into something like that early, but you did.
Yeah, well, all I knew is I had a job to do, and I see all the cords all over the place here. I was a professional cord roller upper, right? We were plugging in all the PA cabinets, and these are long cords. The PA columns are, baskets, metal basket, all the PA cabinets go, and you wire them all up, and then there's a big bundle that comes down, fly the PA baskets up, cables come down to a mixing, to a board on stage, and then those go out to the mixing board on the audience. So it was like a machine. Like you just had your job, and then I got to be able to I could roll cords fast, because that's what your job was every single day. Same setup, same equipment, same cords, same cabinets, same everything. But then there was the show, and then that was a whole different deal.
Oh.
When the lights come up and it's showtime.
Yeah, because you helped put it all together.
Yeah, and then I had jobs on stage during the show.
Oh.
So Ian Anderson, for some people who don't know who Jethro Tull is, famous flute player. It was a rock band with a flutist, and that was very unusual. Anyways, he would do a flute solo, and he had strobe lights, and I would tape his strobe lights to his monitors, and then they gave me the controller on the strobe light and said, you get to decide what speed. Like, so if Ian does a run and it's fast, you can go up, you can go fast with him, and then when he comes down, you can go down, but you can do whatever you want. I can do whatever I want with the strobe lights on Ian Anderson's flute solo.
I'll be darned, because I learned a little bit some of the show from my nephew, who's about 50 years old now. He's got 4 Emmys for his line of work in live television recording. And it's one of those jobs that you make one bad cue on national TV that you can't back up, they might not call you back again. Yeah. So there's a critical thing to do with the realities of show business on a national live.
Yeah.
I mean, big programs.
Right.
He does all these big programs. So at what point did you start getting back into creating with your own hands the things you'd like to create that don't exist?
So finished the Tull tour in Boston, got in a plane, flew to Florida, and then went to work on the Circus World project with Dad. And we built the preview center, which was the beginning of the park. We never built the full park, but we built a small section of the park. And I was working in the wood shop, and I started as an apprentice, but of course I eventually, was given other things to do and did some model work and did some, other woodworking and plastics. And
so you wind up now you're in the circus.
I'm in the circus.
Yeah.
I'm in the circus, but I started out sweeping floors and stacking lumber. Yeah. And so I go from Jethro Tull, 10,000 screaming kids, lots of pretty girls, and now I'm sweeping the floors in Orlando, Florida. And as I'm sweeping and sweeping and sweeping, it's like going, I've made a wrong turn.
Oh.
I liked that other gig better than this one, especially when I was dumping the bins of wood into the trash can, and the foreman liked chewing tobacco. Out of these big wads of chewing tobacco in the bottom of the wood, and the juice all around. It was
so you eventually made a right turn into something else. What was that?
So what I did was I followed Rolly for 3 jobs that he did from 93 to 96. So we went from the Circus World project that didn't get completed to working at Knott's Berry Farm on the Berry Tales ride. Mm-hmm. And then building the Chugga Chugga machine in the Berry Tail ride. That was fun, and that was cool. And I built that machine in that scene, the first scene in the dark ride, from a model that Steve Kirk had built. And it was Steve Kirk's first theme park project.
All right.
No, it was my second theme park project. And this inch-scale model of this kind of crazy Rube Goldberg kind of machine, Steve built the model of, and then I built the full-size version of Steve's model.
Okay. I think you skipped past the era where you and I worked together.
No, this is before that.
Well, you just said 96.
We started to work on, I think, in the 80s.
Yes. So the 90s. Yeah, you went right past the early 80s.
Yes. This is before. So this is before that. So this is 93, 73, 74. Did I say 90?
You said 90.
I apologize. I meant 70. So it was
that's all right.
73.
We both got white hair. See, that's the problem.
I'm throwing a lot of this stuff real fast.
Yeah, okay.
So 73, 74, 75. So it was Circus World, then Berry Tales, which opened in 75. And then I went to a project called the Kahuku Sugar Mill Project in Oahu, Hawaii. It was a project Dad designed.
You just have gotten the doggonest career. You get sampling all these things, good or bad.
Yeah, and the Kahuku job, I turned 21 there.
Okay.
So at 21, I'd already worked on 3 theme park projects by the time I was 21.
Holy moly.
So
I had no idea of this.
That's how you wondered how I knew what to do?
Yeah.
I've been doing it.
Okay.
I've been doing it.
This is so good to hear what you led up to when we both worked for a small company in the San Fernando Valley doing a restaurant show, which is where I finally got a chance to watch you. I'd heard about you, but I'd actually see how you did what you did. And it sort of, in one way, kind of aggravated me because you were so exact and you had no fear to argue with me. This was a lot of people. This is the era where I had already been fired from Disney, in which most people were kind of in fear of me because one time somebody said, "Bob, you're a pussycat now, but you used to terrorize that." How do you mean I terrorize you? If we did something wrong, we'd do anything to avoid the Bob Gurr glare. I didn't realize like that. And then we go to the small company, you're there, and you would snip at me and argue with me, and it was like, I'm being treated like that. So that made me take note of how did Chris get to be that kind of a Chris at that age? I remember you came in the shop, you had glasses, which the top part were shaded. You could see out of the bottom. You dressed kind of, well, like roadie-like in a way. Yeah. But you were determined to help build all the things you were building for this the show. There were several restaurants. Tell me about what that experience was like in that company.
Well, that was the experience with that one was I was in charge of the shop. So I was basically the shop foreman or the lead in the shop. So I wasn't building so much as I was making sure that things were getting built.
Yes, the list.
Hence the list.
Yeah, the list.
So I got the drawings, like, and whether they're coming from you or Tom Reidenbach or whomever, and we're breaking the stuff down. And the guys in my shop, you know, this guy's going to build this thing, or another person, or what have you. And these guys, a lot of them knew what they were doing, mostly, or sometimes they would run into something where they didn't know what they were doing, and then they would just go off on a path. But I had to watch. I had to see that it's all coming together. So if somebody was like, didn't have it, and I'd go out, and this was as they call now, I don't want to use the word superpower because it's so overused, but my secret weapon was I'd go out there, and I had my toolbox there, and but it wasn't my job to build the stuff. My job was to get the stuff built and supervise the construction of. And they'd be working on something, or some guy would be having a problem with something, and I'd say, "Do you want me to show you how to do it?" "Well, sure." And I'd put on my tool belt, and I'd get my tools out, and I go, bum, 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 like that, and they go, "Okay." So when you're supervising people, and people know that they can't BS you, because you'll come out there and you're like, "No, I can figure this out."
Ooh. You know, that's a very powerful position, because I got in a little of that in a shop one time on some monorail parts. The guy said, "You've drawn this thing, it's impossible to build," and it was aluminum extrusion. And I said, "Give it to me." And I take it with my thumb, and I pull, and I twist it around this little form. It was for a clear story window on the Mark III monorail. The look on the guy's face is, "Oh, he did it with his thumbs. We got to build hundreds of these." Oh, but the fact that, you know, I draw the drawings to make monorails. I can go down there and I can make a difficult part that's difficult for them, and I just do it. And I'm not a shop person. That really sets a stage.
Well, so let me ask you something. If you drew something, while you were drawing it, were you thinking about how somebody would actually have to make it?
Constant, right from the get-go. Okay. And that went back to the auto shop. And
okay.
If I'm going to do a procedure or something, and we're going to do this in words, let me touch the parts. Let me see what the parts were going to limit me or guide me.
Right.
So right from the get-go of the little Autopia car for Disneyland in 1955, doing the mechanical stuff, drawing a picture is one thing, but working in a shop with a guy who's going to make the part you just drew, luckily in the machine shop at Disney Studio, there were welders and machinists that were very, very kind because they're older fellas, experienced. And they'd say, Bob, if you draw this again, don't make it like that.
Yeah.
And they would show me.
And they show you why.
So over a period of years,
Yeah.
I loved big steel weldments because I understood what welders like and what welders don't like. And then one day I got ahead of them a little bit because welders like to have a weld and then they grind it down so it looks good and then they paint it.
Right.
And I finally evolved a way. I'm going to design it to where you have like a fillet weld. They can't grind it. And then they would say, Bob, we have to make a perfect weld. Well, make a perfect weld.
Lay a good bead.
And I said, well, you can chip the berries off with the paint, of course.
But it's got to be a nice
We are
bead.
going to paint the weld. Yeah, so you don't understand any of that unless you're seeing and touching and doing, but you're basically paid to draw the pictures.
Right, but you get good when you work simpatico with the crew.
Correct.
And you're not giving them stuff where they go, this guy, I mean, we got to, because they'll eventually just do what works.
Yes.
They will vary from the drawing if they keep the overall shape. I always talk about you keep the outside lines, you keep the basic shape, and then everything else you do in between that is like, that could be your decision.
Right. See,
as long as it gets done.
Yeah, because you just showed me a couple of minutes ago, you could be a supervisor, but a teacher when you needed. That puts you in a very powerful position. What other interesting jobs did you do beyond that?
Well, so I skipped over the late 70s, just before I started working with you. Mm-hmm. So I worked on the first Star Trek movie, and I worked on the, most specifically, the Star Trek Enterprise, the main ship for the motion picture. Mm-hmm. And I worked in a special effects shop, and I worked on that model, and that model took almost a year. And I was one of the people that worked on it. It was a lot of people, but I did a lot of the main construction of the Starship Enterprise.
I had no idea. I don't know what else I'm going to discover. I keep asking. Well, tell me more.
Well, so I think the part you might enjoy on this one. So the gentleman who hired me, what happened was, I'm working on big full-size stuff. You know, I'd finished working on, the Circus World job and the Kahuku Sugar Mill, and this is all full-size sets, big stuff. And the downside to all that big stuff is, it's heavy. It's big and heavy stuff. So I saw Star Wars, and like a lot of kids, youngsters, like saw Star Wars, and it just like, what, it was an eye-opener. But what was eye-opening was the technology. And I knew those were models, right? Mm-hmm. And I learned about that. But I wanted to work, I'm going to work on a special effects motion picture, like I decided. Mm-hmm. Called Dad, who do you know? You got to know somebody. And he goes, I'm not sure. Let me think about it and blah, blah, blah. So he calls a person. So sometimes it's like you get connections in town about, like, not the first person, so a person who knows a person.
Yeah.
So he talks to David Rutterow, who was an illustrator on his theme park stuff, who had hired a designer who worked on Knott's Berry Farm, who was a designer from Long Beach College, and he was putting together a shop to build the motion picture, the Star Trek picture. Got his number, I got his number. I went down and interviewed with Jim Dow for the Star Trek job. He gave me the job, but he told me later, he said, your resume was just all carpentry and big stuff. You had no models in your resume, in your portfolio, and I needed all this woodworking done in the shop. I needed to have work tables built, lumber racks, I needed doors hung, I needed all this stuff. So I really hired you as a carpenter. And at the time, I didn't know that. But I get the job, so I'm building all this stuff. I'm using the woodworking machinery like I learned how to use in high school and all these other jobs. And comes time to build models, and he hires these students from Art Center. And they're really good as far as design and learning how to do prototypes. And they learn how to use woodworking tools and paints and sanding and what have you to build their mock-ups. But they were small, and they didn't have, you know, the hours and hours and hours running machines and building stuff. And like, you just get good at machines when you've spent, you know, hundreds of hours on them. So I think one of the big turning points was one day, you know, and I'm doing some carpentry job and what have you, and I'm watching these guys try to build this space station, and they had this 12-inch acrylic tube about this big, and they were standing at the table saw, these two guys, and they're standing at the table saw, and they're like scratching their head, and they're looking at the table saw, and they're like doing this, doing that, and I'm like sweeping or cutting or doing something, and I'm watching this. I'm also sort of the unofficial shop foreman to make sure that people don't do goofy things on tools, right? So I'm watching them, and I'm thinking, they don't know what they want. They don't know how to do this. So I walked up to him. I said, so what's the deal? What are you guys doing? Well, we've got to cut this 1.5-inch strip off of this tube to make this, the start of this little office complex. I said, yeah. I said, would you like for me to do that for you? I said, would you please? So I take the tube, I took the sliding gauge, I make my little jig, because I said, how many of them do you need? And they go, 8. I went, oh, okay. And so I very carefully, because you're very careful on a table saw with a piece of 12 inch.
That piece,
yeah. And I flung out these perfect 1.5-inch strips and gave them to him. Thank you. Like sweating, right? And that's sweating stuff. Like, you know, when you mess up on a table saw, what happens is the piece you're working on, if it chatters, the machine will throw the thing.
Hit you in the eye.
It'll hit you. It'll go behind you. It'll do whatever.
Well, this is very revealing. You just brought up a subject that I see happening in industry today. You can have an educational curriculum, let's say for a designer, but the curriculum is missing the realities of how materials behave if you do not know what to do with them.
Yeah.
Luckily for them, highly educated from a very important place, a skill they had no idea how they would do something they designed. This is so crucial. When you have designers who are connected with the reality, the materials, the functions and the durability stuff, if they're connected, you have a company that can do a really, really good project. But when you have people that might be too compartmentalized, I only draw up to this point.
Yeah.
I have no idea how you're going to do the thing I've invented, when it should be the other way around. It's like, there's practical ways to do stuff. Well, we'll get a designer to design that. But when it's design-led, sometimes you can miss that. But somehow you picked all of that stuff up as you had your path. So what were the next jobs that were super interesting?
Let's see. So, okay, so the special effects jobs, there was about 2 years of those. We'll move away from those. That's when I took my career took a different path from television and motion pictures. And that's when I came to work at the puppy shop, the puppy dogs, with you.
Oh, okay. Now we're up to like
now we're up to
81, 82, somewhere.
Somewhere around there, right? Did that? You want me to go past that?
Yeah, go on past that.
Okay, so
we were able to talk about that.
Yeah, we talked about that. So after that, I had this odd phase. In fact, it was even during then that it was like back to like, well, what do I want to do? Like, because this was just, so here's the Rolly in me, you know, like, was like, what interests me and what do I want to do? Well, rock videos were a big deal, right? MTV and the whole rock video thing. And I thought, working on rock videos, that'd be cool. So I actually called in sick. It was either that company or another company, because I met somebody who was doing rock videos and they needed a carpenter. They needed a guy who could build stuff on set to do some work on a rock video. So I just called in sick because I wanted to do it, right? And it was fun and crazy. And then eventually I was freelancing and I ended up doing a few rock videos and a few kind of what I'll call rock and roll, you know, oriented stuff. I worked on a video for Tina Marie called Lover Girl, and I designed the stage, built the stage, set up the stage, did the whole thing in a week. right? And it was the most breakneck speed project I've ever done, right? It was like a big hit on the Rolling Stone top 10 chart. We hit #2 under Madonna, right? And I made no money. I almost lost money on the thing. It was horrible. It was fantastic, and it was excruciatingly difficult on the other time.
Okay, what did you follow that with? You must have learned some things about what might look good, but turned out not to be.
Well, no,
where did you finally settle out?
It was just all that, and the freelancing. It was fun, and they were great jobs, but it was feast or famine, or it was, can I keep getting the bills paid? And I had to line the next job up after the one I'm already working on. So it's this constant, like, you're always hustling. And I'm thinking, if I hustle, there's not going to be any time for myself.
Okay.
Which is what led me, because of a chance meeting with somebody who I met at the only animated display and design company, which was Roger Brogy Jr.
Right.
And Fred Hope and Jim Elliott, Eddie Sato.
Okay.
And I met Eddie Sato, and I ran into Eddie Sato shopping in Century City, and we were talking, and he goes, "Hey, Chris, I'm going to go work at Disney. I'm going to go work at Imagineering. There's all kinds of work there. You ought to think about coming over."
Did you?
He planted the seed.
Oh, okay.
And I went, work in Imagineering? It was like I hadn't thought that was an option.
It was so obvious. But
I know it was obvious, but it was Dad's, so it's like, oh, I want to go follow his footsteps, right? like what a, like, am I a glutton for punishment? I've worked with him before, and I know how people think about, oh, your dad got you the job, you don't know anything, So I thought, you know what? And I was sick and tired of working like crazy, not having health insurance, and I thought, I got to check this out. So he helps me out. No, I know what it was. So I talked to Jeff Burke, who I work with in another company with Dad. So I didn't use Dad as an in. I would talk to Jeff Burke. Jeff Burke gave me the phone number for Mike Morris, who was going to be the hiring person at Imagineering. And I called him up, and we talked, we interviewed, and he said, "Great, we'll hire you." I said, "Great." Well, all this took, like, between the phone call and the interview and the paperwork and the thing and the thing and the thing, I think it took 3 months. It's like kind of like how things will go with them.
Big companies, the way they.
Yeah. So I finally, I'm going to start on Monday. So I called Dad up, and I said, "Hey, you want to have breakfast on Sunday?" So I took Dad to Bob's Big Boy on Riverside Drive on Sunday. And we're having, I'll use the thing. We're having breakfast, and I said, "Dad," and he's drinking his coffee. I said, "I'm gonna go start working for at WED tomorrow." Did the spit take with the coffee. He goes, "You're gonna what?" I said, "I'm starting tomorrow." "You're starting tomorrow?" "Yep." And that 3 months that I just kept it all under the
So
lid.
how long did you work at WED, which turned into a WDR?
Yeah, all sum total after I left once and came back, about 28 years.
28. That was a year
years.
more than I worked there.
Is it?
Really?
Yeah, and you and I worked together at Imagineering.
Yeah.
Remember?
Yeah.
Baby Herman's runaway buggy ride.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah. This was when I came back as a
You came
consultant.
back to work at R&D.
Yes.
For Dave Fink.
Yeah. This was different.
Yes.
Now I get to, as a professional corporation in California, I send them invoices and they pay, but they pay what I charge.
Okay, that's right.
Oh boy.
You were consulting.
Yeah, you and I were. We were in the golden years.
Yep.
That was fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, then at the 28 years, you still build models. What really intrigued me was the very famous Tower of the Four Winds for the New York World's Fair, the Small World. That turned out to be a very, very famous, let's say, invention by your dad.
Yeah.
And you had the opportunity, not too many years ago, to use all your model skills, a little tiny detail stuff. And I've seen your model 7 times. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous depiction, more in the slender scale of the original design. You must have had a great joy later in life to build that.
Yeah, so getting to do that and working on the Oceanside exhibit, that the last Dad's really last big exhibit show. Yeah. I did that when I was given a wonderful opportunity by Walt Disney Imagineering to retire early, and it will give you this. Oh. And I didn't see early retirement at 63 coming, but it did, and it just so happened I was 63, not in 1963. I'd actually started working on the model just before I got that wonderful opportunity to move on, and so I just kept it going. But yeah, I built this Tower of the Four Winds, about 24 inches tall, on my patio table with all my hand tools. And I just drag all my hand tools out onto the table outdoors, and I'd work outdoors, and I got back to where I started. So it was this great bookend of starting my career with Dad, and then literally the last, it was like the last big job.
And kind of summing up our terribly revealing conversation here.
40-some years, my goodness.
We, after Rolly's not with us anymore, you have sort of stepped into what I'd say the more public sharing life, which I want to see you do a lot more of. And I think you sort of dipped your toe into doing an event. You had that wonderful program down at the Bowers Theater. Are you comfortable with that?
I am, but you know, the whole purpose of all these talks right now is to sell this wonderful book.
Here comes the commercial.
Here comes the commercial. Why are there talk shows? Why are you know, Johnny Carson? He'd say, "Well, you're going to be at the Copa next week."
Yes, all right.
So here's the Great Crump Presents His Magic, which you can buy on babytattoo.com.
All right.
And it's the basically the Oceanside show that was photographed, and it's all in this beautiful book. There's lots of great art. I just happened to jump right to the tikis.
Yeah, the good one there. Yeah.
Yeah. This was inspired by the Enchanted Tiki Room, but this is actually a painting that Dad did back in the 60s. Yeah. Anyways, it's a great book. My Tower of the Four Winds model's in the back. All the big stuff, Rolly stuffs, but they actually gave me a spot in the back to talk about the tower.
So,
so I'm selling this book, and I'm doing the talks to promote the book sales.
Right. So yeah, you're sort of like me now. We're out there in the public world. We're answering questions of a historical nature, and we're all sort of in the same arena. I just want to see you do a lot more of that.
I would like to do a lot more, and the better the response, the more encouragement that is. And the last one we did together a few weeks ago at the LA Breakfast Club, there was such a wonderful and positive response to that talk, because of what I added to that talk was some things about Rolly's personal life, and the cottages that he built in Fallbrook. And the whole saga of that whole thing, and they really appreciated that.
You can't get more personal to talk about Rolly than his little boy Chris, who turned out to have his own glorious life over on another path that just went through a maze of different things. And now we're here together, sitting on my couch in my show, which is, you never saw that I would turn into, I have a talk show. And I used to be a happy draftsman. Yeah, see how the lives weave, they just go wherever they're going to go.
They do.
But they all had these paths that were very straightforward paths to do stuff. Well, Chris, I can't thank you enough.
Thanks, Bob.
I have learned so much. I love talking to people that I sort of know, might have worked with a little bit, and then I find out, oh my gosh, all this stuff I never knew, you know. So I've got to, I hope my manager, Ernie, picks out some people that I want to dig deeper and find out all the stuff I never knew about what they used to do. Anyway.
Thanks, Bob.
Kids, I hope you learned so much about just life in general, how a student can develop skills. And the big thing is, I want you to understand, have no fear to always say yes to a job that you know you can't do, and you say, I will figure it out.
That's right.
So thank you. Thank you for those words.
You're
Chris.
welcome. Thank you, Bob.